Hi, I am Chad Anderson of Filmmaker U, filling in for Gordon Burkell. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their skill set. You can learn more on filmmakeru.com or follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional, and this week we're pleased to be joined by filmmaker Angeline Walsh, who's been writing, directing, and independently crafting stories for YouTube, particularly the period short series, The Coroner's Assistant. Welcome to the show, Angeline. Appreciate you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I want to ask you first, how you got your start in filmmaking and what drove you to choose writing and directing. It's a big undertaking and it's a big, it's kind of the top level job first.
Mhm.
What drew your interest to that, and where did you get your start from?
Ever since I learned how to read and write, I was writing stories. Um, and when I was 12, I was bored one day, so I borrowed my dad's video camcorder that he used to make family movies, and I started filming things, and I found that I loved it. So from then on, I just started like making up stories and filming them. Sometimes I would rope family members and friends into my little stories. A lot of times I use dolls and other toys to sort of act out my stories. But yeah, that's how I got my start really. Um, and yeah, it all started from there. And with directing, I'm someone who very much values creative control. So if I'm writing a story, I want to be the one to see it through. I want to be the one to be in the director's seat, uh, making sure everything is coming together the way it should be, the way I imagined it.
I grew up in a household in the projects in East Harlem. There's a program at WNET, the public television station, to get more people of color behind the camera, in the editing room, doing sound, writing scripts. When they put me in a dark room and they showed me how to use the splicer and the rewinds, I felt this big sigh of relief, this sense of, wow, I found my space. The editing part of filmmaking is the real nuts and bolts of what makes films come to life. You can ask Spielberg, you can ask Tarantino, you can ask Spike. When you sit here, this is where the proof is in the pudding. I'm Sam Pollard, and this is my class on documentary editing.
Interesting. I was going to ask you to transition from a writer to a director, to have something that you've had written and then say, now I have to look at this as a visual piece of art and direct the actors or the rest of the crew to envision what I had written down in paper. Is that a struggle? Is that a challenge for you? Or is that a struggle in general? To how do you make that transition? Let me ask that question.
To me, it really goes together in my mind. Every time I write something for the screen, I always imagine that I'm going to be the one directing. Um, Yeah, I never assume that I'm gonna give it to somebody else. It's just like, to me, when I'm writing something, I'm writing it for myself first, so I'm writing it to direct, and so I have that vision from the beginning. Yeah. Um, so for me, there wasn't a transition. It was always very much, um, my whole, you know, I'm, approaching the pieces, as a whole artistically, not just, oh, it's, something I'm writing and then, something I'm going to be directing. I approach it, from that way first, both aspects.
In particular, in the coroner's assistant, were there moments that you had written that once you took it to on set that you said, "Hey, this isn't working the way they want to work it, and I have to reevaluate it"?
I think so. When I first speak to my talent, I always tell them, if you're reading something like a line or we're on set and we're filming it and it just isn't, coming out right, I encourage them to reword it in a way that makes sense for the character in that moment. I'm very open to spontaneity and improvisation on set, and I encourage it. So there was a lot of times when we were filming something and it just like the way I wrote it just wasn't, making sense with the energy of the scene or whatever. So we just sort of, either pared it down a little bit or switched some words around. And that happens quite a lot. You write something and it just comes out clunky, or when the actor says it, you just had to change it up a little bit. But I'm very open to that. I'm never when I write a script, I'm never dead set on something, or very rarely am I dead set on words being said exactly the way I wrote them. I think that um I like it when the actors have the creative freedom as well to sort of interpret the words their own way, and usually they're right with the way that they choose to express it. So
Have you encountered that a lot where actors will say something or have a way of delivering something and you're like, wow, I wish I'd written it that way. That makes so much more sense. Or, something came out of nowhere that's like, oh, this is adapted my art in a new, interesting way.
yeah, I mean, a lot of times the actor will say something with an emphasis on a word or phrase that I hadn't imagined when I was writing, but the way they say it really makes sense. So I think a big part of it is trusting the actor's intuition to interpret the dialogue the way the character would say it. Because you don't always know that when you're writing it, especially when you don't know who's going to be cast in the role. So if someone's cast in the role and they are on set and they say a line a certain way, I let them say it that way. If I really, really don't like it, then I'll just, we'll just do several takes of it. But usually the actor is right, and you have to trust that the actor knows what they're doing.
So with a character like Thomas, played by Jeremy, you've
Mhm.
worked with him previously in other shorts and other films. Um,
Um, so actually, well, I have worked with him since, but the coroner's assistant was the first thing I worked with
was
him
the
on.
first thing you worked with him?
Mhm.
Yeah. How much is he bringing to that? Because it seems like his personality and his character's personality is very creative or very very interpretive in terms of there's a lot going on
Yeah.
acting wise. I see in
Mhm.
him.
Yeah.
Um, he's fantastic. But
Yeah, he is.
he's somewhat melodramatic and somewhat out there, and it's a fascinating character.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
He brought so much dimension into that character. Jeremy is a performance artist, so I knew he was gonna be I knew he was gonna take in a very wacky direction sometimes and really embody the character. To me, Thomas in my mind is a very whole body character. He like everything he says, like he acts with his whole body. So Jeremy was perfect for that. Yeah.
what drew you to this time period or this era or Victorian? You're from Cleveland, Ohio,
I
so
am. Yes.
Victorian England. What drew you to that time period in that location? What was really
Um,
going for you?
I've always had a fascination with the Victorian era. Um, and yeah, I mean that's pretty much the simplest answer. There's just so much to work with there. The Victorians were so weird and eclectic, and there was so much going on in that time period that I mean, I could write only in that time period my whole life and never run out of ideas. So it's such a wonderful, and then, wonderful aesthetics, wonderful fashion, and it's just so everything's so interesting about that specific time to me.
No, I was going to ask you about this because for the time period, I'm not sure I have done enough research on Victorian era England, but the set design, the costumes, the look of it. I'm assuming this was shot in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes.
Um, how did you do this or make this look like how much went into this to make it look, like that time period and that location?
Well, for the exteriors is a little bit more difficult because we had to find specific locations that had um the look we were going for, and we could in places that we could film in an area where um we weren't going to be interrupted by so many modern looking things. So that was a little bit challenging to find specific locations, and there was a lot of locations where there was like modern street lamps and modern lighting, and it got a little bit annoying trying to film around those things sometimes. um but when I wrote it, I knew it was going to be a little bit contained because we just didn't have the budget to, shut down whole streets or build facades or whatever. So I knew we were going to have to film on location for most of the things. So when I was writing it, I kept that in mind, knowing that later we would have to location scout for very limited visuals, with exteriors. With interiors, it was a little bit easier, because, for example, a big part of what we filmed inside, we filmed at the Hickory's Museum in Elyria, Ohio, which is it was built, in the 1870s. So, Victorian era. So inside, the architecture and the structure of the home is of the period. So, and with, that museum, they gave us a lot of freedom to bring our own props in, bring our own furniture in. So we, the room that's Oliver's main room in the show, that's all our props basically. The bookshelves and the fireplace were there, and I think there's like a little piano that was there, but everything else is we decorated and furnished it. So we were given a lot of freedom there to just make it look however we wanted. So that was really nice.
That was really fantastic of them. I mean, to let you just
Yeah.
be in there and just do whatever you wanted to do and
Yeah.
bring your own stuff in there. And
hmm
yeah, that's amazing. You mentioned budget. It seems like, for the independent, the challenge is always budget. How did you fund this? How was this handled in terms of, was this a number of favors, or was this, how did you, who signed on to this?
So we did do some crowdfunding. The first episode was basically funded by me and my producer Georgiana Lascu. Um, so yeah, and so the very first episode, which we filmed episode 1 first, and then we crowdfunded to film the last of it, so the 3 episodes. We crowdfunded about $4,000, and then we actually had a couple people who signed up to be producers. They donated some of their money as well, but it wasn't like an incredible amount because me and Georgie ended up having to pay more out of our own pockets to sort of fill in the gaps for other things that we needed. But we did end up crowdfunding and getting a little bit of funding elsewhere, but a lot of it we did end up having to pay ourselves as well.
Now, Georgiana was also played Mary Cross in this.
Yes.
She's also fantastic. So she was taking the role of basically producer and actor in
Yes.
this as well.
Yes.
Go ahead.
She actually she wasn't in the first episode. Her character was not in episode 1. So it kind of worked out for her to kind of put on her producer hat for a little bit and, get used to producing on this set particularly before she had to act. When she had to act, it got a little bit more stressful for her. Because she had to focus more on remembering her lines and all that, as well as being a producer. But it was interesting.
Now, talking about stress, I was wondering, because this is for an independent producer, an independent director, an independent filmmaker, this seems like a big undertaking.
Yeah.
Was this monumental for you in terms of scope and scale and size of this?
Yes.
This was a lot of work. It seems like a lot of work.
Yes. It was a lot of work. Yeah. So before I made the coroner's assistant, I made a couple of short features just on my own where, I was the role of director, writer, producer. The first movie I made was also the cinematographer. So it's, I was used to sort of like doing everything by myself at a very, very low scale. And so so the coroner's assistant was a way bigger production than I was ever used to, but at the same time, I had way more support than I had before. I had people to help me, Georgiana to help me manage the set and manage the production. I had way more crew members. I had people who did cinematography, not me, which was great because I'm not that great of a cinematographer. It was like an actual production instead of just me doing everything on my own. So that was nice.
That is nice. That is good. It's good to have that tribe of people that kind of support you and take care of all the other things, that so you can focus on just directing or just writing and directing. Guillermo del Toro talks about this idea called the dare.
Hmm.
And he talks about this idea of that there are four parts of production. There is the pre-production, production, and post-production. And the fourth part is the part that no one ever talks about, and that is the, do you decide to do this? Do you decide to
Hmm.
try this and put this into the world? And
Hmm.
that takes precedent over everything else. It's this idea that you have to, you have to dare yourself to, hey, I'm going to make a series. Hey, I'm going to make a
Yeah.
movie. Hey, I'm going to make something big. And it's a little, for me, I imagine it's terrifying to say, hey, I'm going to try to put myself out there.
Yeah.
Was there a dare in your mind of daring yourself to do something as massive as this as an independent producer?
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of feeling of inadequacy when I think as a, as an indie filmmaker, because you don't have the support of a major studio or, you know, you're not getting paid. Like I didn't get paid for any of this. There was, um, you know, uh, there's a lot of overcoming feelings of, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm not good enough to be doing this. I'm not professional enough to be doing this. But at the same time, when you're on this, low in the totem pole, you really have nothing to lose at the same time. So you think, well, why not? Right. And that's always kind of my attitude is, I'm very curious, and so, uh, and I'm very stubborn. So for me, it's, you know, why not do something? Let's see what happens if I do it. And if I just sat on the project and just kept it all to myself and I never shared what I wrote or never tried making it, I think it would kill me the thought of like what would have happened if I did it? What would have happened if I actually just tried, because nothing can hurt by trying.
That's good advice. Speaking of advice, is there advice you think for other people who are aspiring to do this? I'm a college professor by trade, and so I work with college students on a regular basis who, aspire to be filmmakers. Is there advice that you would give to a group of students or to a student who wanted to go out and do this?
Yeah, I mean, my advice would just to be to do it. And I've talked about this in other places, but if you're a writer and you just see yourself as a writer, and you're a student or you're an indie filmmaker, or you're like interested in indie film, just try making it yourself. See if you can. See if you can put yourself in a producer role, put yourself in a director role, and trust yourself that you know your story and your characters well enough to be able to do that. Um, I think a big part of indie filmmaking is sort of, you know, circumnavigating the whole gatekeeper thing, right? So if you're a writer and you really, really want this film made, um, you know, rethink maybe trying to approach gatekeepers and instead, you know, do it yourself. Um, and if you can't do your dream project by yourself, do something smaller first. Test the waters a little bit. Write something smaller, write something small, like lower budget that you can do yourself. And then when the time comes for you to have the chance to do your dream project, you'll be more confident and more able to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, in terms of the coroner's assistant, do you have hopes for this? And I want to talk both about
Mm.
success as bigger picture, what becomes of this successfully, or also creatively, will there be future episodes? Will there be future, could this develop into something else? What do you think? What are your hopes for this?
Well, my number one hope right now is that people watch it. We spent, 5 years making it, and we decided to self-distribute, which is, a bit of a risk. But we're hoping that we'll find an audience somehow, some way. And yes, I do have more written. I did write a second season. Um, it took me 3 years to do it, but I wrote it. I wasn't really planning on writing it because at the time I started writing it, we hadn't even finished post production yet, and we were in like a little bit of a post production hell because we got an editor for it in February of 2020, and then the world got a little crazy. So I think I was very restless, and I decided to just start writing it because I had a couple ideas, and then yeah, I ended up writing a second season. So I do have more that I'd love to make. But I would also love for people to watch and enjoy what we have right now in the meantime.
Absolutely. And so you are in a streaming a category for a streaming series being nominated for that. Can you tell me a bit about that and what that's like?
Yeah, The Coroner's Assistant is nominated for Best Writing in a Comedy Streaming Series, and Best Period Costume at the Hollywood Critics Association Awards. Well, at least they used to be called the Hollywood Critics Association Awards. I should correct myself. They're now called the Hollywood Creative Alliance, and the awards are called the Astra Awards. Yeah, a little bit of a mouthful. But yes, The Coroner's Assistant is nominated in the writing category alongside shows like Wednesday and The Bear and Only Murders in the Building. Some pretty, you know, well-known titles.
Sure.
Which is a bit intimidating, but yeah, it's very humbling as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but you're in a good place. I mean,
Yeah.
if those are your peers, you know, that says something positive at least
Yeah.
about the quality of the work.
Yeah, I hope so.
I hope so too. Lastly, I wanted to ask you if you have a guilty pleasure, something you watch that may be a little bit embarrassing or maybe a little not necessarily your most highbrow creativity, something you watch just to decompress perhaps on TV or film.
So I do watch a lot of TikTok videos. Um, and I watch a lot of well, I'll just watch whatever comes up on my For You page really, but uh I've gotten into watching a lot of like ghost hunting TikTok videos, which I think are really interesting. Um yeah, I don't know. I think that maybe some people find that kind of weird. I just think it's really fun and interesting. Yeah.
There's you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
There's television for everyone, you know, it's all kinds of things. You
Yeah.
never know. It's incredibly popular.
Yeah, it is. It's very intriguing. Yeah.
It absolutely works. Angeline, thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you
I
so
really
much.
enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's gonna be it for us this week. You can check us out at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I am Chad Anderson. Thank you again, Angeline, and thank you all so much for watching.